Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity today. I'm Troy Baker I'm the Executive Director with the Walla Basin Watershed Council here in Milton Freewater. Next slide. Oh, I think, yeah, there we go. Let's start by making sure everyone knows where the Walla Watershed is located. We're a bi-state watershed that's located in southeastern Washington and northeastern Oregon. The black polygon delineates the boundary of our watershed on the map there. The geography alone presents potential issues. When looking to fund projects, match requirements can differ depending on what state or our projects are located. Oregon grant opportunities have to be used in Oregon and vice versa with Washington. The red circle down there is just showing where our office is located there in Milton Freewater. Okay, next slide. So what is the Watershed Council? We're a local nonprofit group established to improve the conditions of the watershed in our area. We're non-regulatory and offer watershed residents the opportunity to evaluate watershed conditions. We also help to identify cost-effective opportunities for habitat improvements. And often we help local, state, federal agency staff and other groups implement scientifically informed restoration, research, and educational activities. Next slide. The pictures on the screen are from a number of our projects. Our Watershed Council conducts basin trend and project effectiveness monitoring, stakeholder outreach, and educational projects. We also provide a local perspective to basin planning and policy decisions. And we participate in strategic planning efforts and conduct watershed assessments. And all of those pretty much lead to implementing aquatic habitat and floodplain restoration projects. Next slide. So often when approached by landowners with potential restoration projects, we typically consider those 6 bullet points on the slide and ask a couple of questions such as, does the project fall in line with strategies and priorities of assessments and planning documents? Is the project scientifically defensible? It's doing that due diligence and consulting the local, state, and federal agencies that will help answer those questions. And then those initial conversations with the agency partners can lead to possible project partners and in-kind match in the future. Even with smaller habitat restoration projects, typically they take at least a couple of years from start to finish. So it's important to have a certainty of success when looking for that initial funding investment. Next slide. So watershed councils are typically small with limited staff, but through the years, we've been able to fund small to larger scale habitat restoration projects by partnering with other organizations and agencies. Funding projects can be extremely difficult and even more so without active project partners. Having active partners, or at least having support through acquiring project support letters, can increase that potential for funding. Some grant programs either require or recommend partnering with others. And then having that local support will strengthen the applications and typically will increase the likelihood that the review process will be a positive one. Once funding is secured, partners can help provide that required grant match either through in-kind contributions or through cash contributions. Next slide. The stakeholder engagement component is extremely important and typically begins during that first initial meeting with the landowner and should never be taken for granted. The landowner typically can provide that valuable component to addressing grant match requirements, especially when you're limited on grant opportunities. And then also developing a base of local volunteers has multiple benefits. The first being possible in-kind match, not to mention that physical help during our project implementation. The goal is to have a positive environmental impact in our basin. So having that local community support can lead to future successful projects as well. Next slide. So I'm going to dive in now to a couple of our Watershed Council project examples. The first one is a restoration effort. It's located on the main stem of the Walla River. The Walla River begins in the headwaters of the Blue Mountains and then flows westerly and northwesterly out to the Columbia River. This project site is approximately 2.5 miles up from our office here at Milton Free Water, and there were multiple project phases. The first was focused on removing a private levee and creating a side channel. The side channel added complexity, additional capacity, and increased available in-stream habitat for ESA listed summer steelhead, bull trout, and reintroduced spring chinook. We had some sedimentation issues post phase 1, and so a phase 2 was necessary to develop a design with multiple inlets to the side channel. And when implemented, it would be self-cleaning and provide a perennial flow to the existing side channel. And that image on the slide was taken just a couple of weeks ago. We had a group of college students out, and you can notice that newly formed beaver dam. So now we're working with the beavers that are out there. Next slide. So the project required multiple years of funding support, and we targeted the Oregon Water Enhancement Board or Watershed Enhancement Board for technical assistance funds that we were able to match with BPA, and also a large landowner in-kind contribution. That funded the designs for phase 1. BPA and landowner in-kind contributions funded the design for the second phase. And then for construction of both phases, we targeted OWEB restoration grants with the required match coming from BPA and in-kind landowner contributions. The image on the slide was taken above the multiple side channel inlets right after we completed the construction of phase 2. And we've since concentrated on our replanting efforts through not only our efforts, but volunteer efforts as well. In fact, we have a volunteer planting effort at the project this weekend, and we hope to complete our planting efforts by this year. Next slide. So always be prepared for the unexpected. Phase 2 designs were completed in 2009, and construction was scheduled for the summer of 2020. We had secured all of our funding for the project construction through BPA and match funds from OWEB. But unfortunately, in February of 2020, the Walla River experienced a 100-year flood event. So a resurvey and design update was necessary, and we didn't have the money budgeted to do so. We were able to utilize a local funding opportunity from URUS Community Benefit Plan. It's a small opportunity that was administered to the Umatilla County. And that small grant provided the funding to complete the survey and update the designs, keeping the project on schedule and on track. A timing of project funding when multiple sources of funding are used is always challenging. And the redesign had the potential to delay construction for over a year. So it's always important to be aware of local funding opportunities or sources that can help when issues arise that can impact a project's success. Next slide. Just in summary, before the project construction of the first phase, the reach was confined and lacked complexity, and the floodplain was disconnected from the river. And the blue line or poly line on the image traces the old river channel. If you can just press forward. And now the side channel has multiple inlets, and the river is again connected to the floodplain, and the aquatic habitat is increased by almost 1/2 mile within that reach. Next slide. So a second project I'll touch briefly on is a project that's located on Cottonwood Creek. It's a tributary of the Walla River. Cottonwood Creek provides habitat for ESA listed steelhead and red band trout. While this project was designed and constructed between 2008 and 2011, it's a great example of leveraging the project partners' abilities through funding and actively participating. The image on the right was taken in May of last year as the Watershed Council staff engaged an upstream landowner for a possible potential future project. Next slide. So this project was developed through a landowner discussion with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff, ODFNW, approached the Watershed Council to determine our willingness to develop and lead the project. After we assumed that project leadership, the Watershed Council applied and secured technical assistant funds through a grant. That TA grant was funded focusing on channel and floodplain topography survey work. Once that work was completed, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservations were brought in to complete the restoration designs with input from ODFNW staff. Next slide. And here's the breakdown of the budget for the project. OWEB provided that large share of funding for this project as they funded the construction and a portion of the materials for the channel restoration project. We utilized back then for the sake of salmon funding, and then which provided funding for the technical assistance. Match funding was provided by the tribes and landowner in-kind contributions and a small portion from the Watershed Council. Next slide. So our goal for this project was to increase fish habitat passage, riparian cover, and increase the hydrologic function for about half a mile stretch of Cottonwood Creek. The foundation of this project's success was based upon the ability to leverage Basin partners to participate actively and provide needed funding support through in-kind contributions, awarded grant funds, and also cash match. Next slide. So on this slide is a list of possible project partners for in-kind contributions or funding support. It's not a totally inclusive list whatsoever. It's just an example of funding sources that could be used to pull together funding and in-kind contributions. It's more a way to try to think outside the box when it comes to funding projects and research, what opportunities are available locally that could provide needed funding to complete your project or to provide required match. Next slide. And the logos on this slide are just an example, a small sample of the Watershed Council partners that have worked with us since our founding in May of 1994. And I really can't emphasize enough the importance of developing those local partnerships and how vital they are to developing, funding, and completing and implementing projects. Next slide. With that. And if feel free to get in contact if you have any questions or would like to know anything more about some of our projects here at the Watershed Council. Thank you.